First, I want to make it clear this is not a recipe for traditional Russian cabbage rolls. The name of this channel is Cooking in Russia, not Russian Cooking. There are many versions of cabbage rolls spanning Europe from Sweden to Austria and beyond. I received many requests for a cabbage roll recipe, and what I'm presenting here is what I personally find to be the most delicious type. However, if you're accustomed to eating the very simple rice and ground beef type with tomato sauce, these may be a bit jarring because they have much deeper and more complex flavor than you're used to, as you would expect when you look at this recipe.
Begin with a nice head of green cabbage, and you take a sharp paring knife and you go around and you cut this out. I'm like, my arms are wrapped around the camera, so I can't really do that right now, so I'm going to turn it off while I cut this. And this is the size piece you want to remove. The rest of this we can use, and we're going to put this into boiling water with the cut side down in the pot. And the smart way to do that is get the pot without any water in it at all first, put the cabbage down in it, and then add water. And the water doesn't need to come up all the way over the top of the cabbage. It's going to steam, and so you just want like a couple of inches of water, 10 centimeters, something like that would be fine. And then we're going to put a lid on it, and the vapor that comes up will condense, and it'll steam the top of the cabbage anyway. The bottom part is the part that needs the most heat in order to cook. So we'll begin with cold water, put it on the stove, and bring it up to a boil, and then we'll begin counting the time then. Okay, some people put salt in here. It's not going to make any difference at all in the end, because there's going to be plenty of salt absorbed into the cabbage later. That's all we need. The water's not just a little bit over half, maybe halfway up the cabbage. Put this on, bring it up to a boil. This is what you want to see. The water boiling around the edge, of course, then counting the time. And during this time, we also want to get the rice cooked. I've got 100 grams of jasmine rice weighed out there. I'm adding the 45 grams of tomato paste this time. This is paste, not puree, not sauce. This is actually the one that I make in, as explained in volume 3 of my cookbook series, but you can use a good quality Italian one. Don't use a cheap one. It reflects on the flavor in the end. There's the 75 mils of wine. Again, from volume 3, I'm using the Spice Blend. Half a teaspoon of salt. It's not very much salt for this rice, but it's going to have plenty of salt later. The 200 mils of water, and that's it. We're going to bring this up to a simmer on the stove. After this rice has been simmering for about 5 minutes, I'm going to put a lid on it and reduce the heat. Next, we have 180 grams of lamb here and 120 grams of onion, which I'm going to cut up in just a minute. The lamb, I'm just going to season with some coarse black pepper and a little coarse salt. And we're going to begin frying the lamb. We want to get good caramelization on this, and then we'll add the onion and cook that too, as you'll see. I have a non-stick skillet on a high heat, number 8 out of 1 to 10. Just putting a little bit of olive oil in. Begin frying the meat. After 2 or 3 minutes, when you've got some browning established on the lamb, then you can add the onions. It's been about 3 more minutes. You can see the onions are getting quite brown. They're not burning yet, but it won't be too much longer before they actually do start to burn. We don't want that. We don't want that bitterness, but we do want a lot of caramelization there and the interaction with the lamb fat. So that's what we've got. Now this is 150 grams of passata that's going to be used mostly for the sauce, but we're going to put just a little bit of it in now. A couple tablespoons, borrow it out of this. And now I'm going to turn the heat off and let this cool down slowly at room temperature. Don't put it in the freezer or anything to speed it up. Just let it cool at room temperature until we're ready for it. Okay, the rice is still cooking. Cabbage is about ready to be taken out. This looks fine. I'm just going to leave this. I'm going to move the pan off the heat and let it sit down, cool down. Okay, at this point you should have the cabbage cooling down to room temperature. You've got the lamb, the onions, and a little bit of that passata resting, cooling down to room temperature, and you get the rice finishing up cooking. The next step is making the sauce. I've got 10 grams of dark brown sugar, a full teaspoon of paprika. Now this is the one that I made in volume 1 of the cookbook series. You can use a commercial paprika, but make your own, it'll be better. 4 or 5 cloves of garlic, the rest of the 150 grams of passata, it's almost 150 grams, we just took a little bit out for the lamb, and the cider vinegar back here, and do chop up the garlic ahead of time, as explained in my cookbook series. This will help the flavor come out much better. I've got a small 1 quart Calphalon dish. You can use any, you can use a heavy stainless steel one. Make sure you have enough oil to coat the bottom of the surface. The heat setting is on about 7.5. We're going to let this oil come up to temperature before continuing. Okay, if you have a digital infrared thermometer, you're looking for about 300 degrees is the temperature. It's 300 Fahrenheit. We're going to add passata. Not quite the same process as when we're making the pizza sauce or regular tomato sauce. It's a little bit different. There's the sugar. There's the paprika. But again, I'm not gonna stir this. I'm just gonna let it sit like this for a bit. Okay. After about 3 minutes have passed, I'm gonna add the garlic to the top. I'm still not stirring it though. Let it continue cooking. Okay, 30 seconds more have passed. Now I'm finally going to stir it. And I'm going to add the vinegar now. This is very dark, as you can see. It's going to have some nice deep dark tones in there. And there's the water. Okay. I'm going to bring this up to a simmer and let it cook for just 5 minutes. After it comes up to where it's starting to boil, you need to taste it and adjust the salt. You're probably going to need somewhere around half a teaspoon salt in it. You want it to be not too salty, but you want it to have some salt because this is the salt that's going to go into the cabbage when it's cooking, into the outside of the cabbage. So don't make it too bland or the cabbage will be bland. Okay, and that's it. We're just going to let this cool down to room temperature too, or cool down at room temperature anyway. We have to wait for the other ingredients to cool off before we can begin making the filling now. And when the final time is done on the rice, you need to check it. It should be very flavorful and not completely cooked, but almost cooked. Not al dente or anything, but just slightly undercooked. I've got 150 grams here of very fatty pork. It's like pork belly. It's what you use to make bacon from. But it's not processed to make bacon. Not smoked or anything. Now I've got the lamb that was cooked with the onions and a little bit of passata. Put this together. And finally I got about 90 grams of beef. You can use any beef you've got. Ground beef is really not perfect for this, but it's what I have on hand, and it doesn't matter. The flavor is actually going to come out of the lamb and the onion and the pork. But you need a little bit of ground beef in here to balance the texture. And this is now going to get mixed together and ran through the meat grinder. Now I have the ground meat. I'm going to add a couple tablespoons of freshly minced dill and the rice. Do not put the rice through the meat processor, through the meat grinder. That will not be good. Okay, and we combine this, and this is our filling for the cabbage. Cabbage rolls, I should say. Okay, just stir it to combine it loosely. Even when you get irregular pieces like this, you can still take a knife, trim off the stem like this, and it's still usable. It's not ideal. You want the nice even pieces, of course, but you can trim this down and make even a crooked, jagged piece like this will still work. Watch. I'm filling in it. Pull it up like this. Yeah, it's not as pretty as some of the other ones, but it'll work. And if you get an inch like this that's too much, just cut it off. It's fine. It's not an art project. I mean, there's food in the end. Okay, this is a worst case scenario. Really worst case scenario. This is a pretty ugly one, but you get nice even pieces, you can do a better job. Where you have a rib like this that sticks up, to take a knife now you've got a flat piece that you can work with. I have a ceramic vessel here. I'm going to use unfiltered sunflower oil on the bottom. Most recipes tell you to use the sauce on the bottom. This will work better. It'll keep it from sticking, and it'll also add a lot of flavor. If you don't have this, you can use olive oil, but unfiltered sunflower oil is really, really nice for this. And then you begin layering these, and you don't have to do all of the cabbage rolls at once. This is the ugly one. I just showed you. This one doesn't want to stay together because the cabbage is really, really a bad leaf. But still, you can make it work. Okay, then you've got them loaded into a pan. You've got enough sauce and filling here for more than this amount you see here. I'm just showing you an example. And if the cabbage rolls aren't perfectly tight and even, don't worry about it too much, because they're gonna, by the time they're done cooking, they're gonna change quite a bit. So right now I'm not using all of the sauce because I also didn't use all of the meat and all the cabbage. I'm just using enough. And the next part, you can use parchment paper for this if you want, but more traditional is to take some of the cabbage leaves that didn't make the cut for making rolls and layer them over the top to protect the foil from the acid in the sauce and keep them moist. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now we put foil over, and then this is going to go into the oven. Finally, after a couple of hours here, get this out.
I'm very pleased to announce the release of Volume 3, The Focus on Food Chemistry. I want to clear up a few things about these 3 volumes. First, they all contain completely different information. There's no duplication, they're not revisions. When I wrote Volume 1, I had 2.5 years of YouTube videos to cover. People had been asking me for the printed list of ingredients for all of those dishes, and so I obliged. There are recipes with stepwise directions and many tips offered throughout, as well as an extensive history of Russian cuisine over the last 1,000 years, but Volume 1 is very different from Volume 2 and 3. In Volumes 2 and 3, I only had about 9 months of YouTube recipes to cover in each, so I was able to provide stepwise directions for everything. In Volume 2, I included a lot of additional information about cooking and some simple examples of flavor chemistry to set the stage for Volume 3. While Volume 2 hopefully got you thinking about some of the processes that go on in cooking and how flavors are expressed and sensed at the molecular level, the topic was painted with pretty broad strokes to make it easy to digest, pun intended. Volume 3 is a milestone of the series, in which I have included an entire introductory course in food chemistry, which is why Volume 3 is about 70 pages longer than Volume 2. If you just want the recipes, that's okay too. You don't have to read the first few chapters. But if you've ever been curious about what influences tastes and flavors and the rationale for deciding cooking times and temperatures and why things taste different when they're combined in different ways, this book will answer many of those questions. It also paves the way for Volume 4, which will be next year. I'm pleased to announce a new, completely different type of cookbook. If you watch my channel regularly, you know that the recipes I present are usually centered on meat or seafood and seldom vegetarian dishes. This new book is a departure from that norm. Only vegetables, fruits, eggs, and dairy are used in dozens of recipes here. The key here is that these recipes don't taste like typical vegetarian food. This isn't a bunch of salads and bean sprouts wrapped in pita bread. These are completely satisfying, hearty dishes that use the science of food chemistry to produce meat-like aromas and flavors. But don't worry, there's no weird chemicals involved, just ordinary foods and spices that you can get in any grocery store. This really is an entirely new approach. These are flavorful, filling meals produced by a distinctive cooking method and unexpected combinations of ingredients. Once you see how it's done and understand the method, you can apply these preparations to some of your own recipes and transform them into vegetarian dishes too.
Also look for my cocktail book, Cocktails of the South Pacific and Beyond, Advanced Mixology, available through Amazon online.
If you want to know more about my adventures as a chef around the world and have some great laughs along the way, be sure to check out the video tour of my book, 40 Years in One Night. It's up on YouTube right now. Click the link.